If you're an empath or think you are, here are 7 life experiences you will definitely have if you're an empath. And I would love to hear once you see this video if you've had these 7 life experiences or if there's any others that you think might be common to us as empaths. So let's start off by saying, what is an empath? So an empath is very simply someone who picks up and soaks in other people's pain and suffering. Sometimes if you're a physical empath like me, you will actually feel someone else's like physical pain. So sometimes you'll pick up headaches, stomach aches, etc. Now, a lot of people, I see there's this trend right now in the world, as often there are so many trends, where people are saying that empaths are only created, and the only reason we have this like heightened nervous system, which by the way, been scientifically proven that we actually do have a heightened nervous system. And that the only reason we have the heightened nervous system is due to having gone through trauma. Now, while it's true, and I work with empaths all the way, all around the world, that many empaths have sort of been baptized by fire and have gone through traumatic things, that is not what is causing you to be an empath. Some of us come into the world with our nervous systems just wired differently. And then if you're in some more difficult or traumatic situations, then of course, what are you going to fall back on? As anybody does, they fall back on their strengths to help them to survive. What are your strengths as an empath? But having sort of hyper feeling. And then this unfortunately oftentimes turns into something like hyper vigilance. Okay. So can our empath nature be increased through going through traumatic events? Yes, it can. Can it lead us to end up being very hypervigilant and we don't know why? Yes, it can. Is it what is creating us as empaths? No, it is not. And I can tell you that not only from my experience working with empaths all around the world, but also with my own daughter who came into this world and was very obviously an empath from day one. And that child has as little trauma as any child could possibly have, or is that I can certainly control. And so she has a very peaceful household. She has very supportive parents who adore her. So I watch her, and even teachers would come up to me when she was 2 and say, hey, this is the most empathic child we know. So I just want to make that clear as we get going on this, that there are 7 experiences and probably more than that I have sort of listed, and some of these are very difficult experiences, but is that what made you an empath? No, it's not. You came in coded that way. I think there's just a biological reason for some of us to be very heightened in how we sense things. And I think there's a spiritual reason why we're heightened, because we can help the world heal at a deeper level. So without further adu, now that I've gone off on a little soapbox issue, let's go into those critical experiences that you will have if you are an empath. So the first one I put down is you will have been, or still are, overwhelmed by large crowds. And usually you will have no idea why. So I even see that with kids now that I observe that are like out on the playground, and you'll see these kids and they just suddenly can't take being in like the scrum of like a soccer match or a basketball thing or those sorts of things. Those kids, it is too much. The noise, all the stuff going on. And yes, while kids certainly, or even adults can be on like the autistic spectrum, and so therefore hypersensitive as well. For empaths, what it is you're actually picking up all of the energy in this whole entire space, in this room, and on top of it with perhaps the noise, perhaps anything else. And your system is literally being kind of overloaded, because what I liken it to is you're sort of like a radio tower, and you're taking in that, maybe even thousands of little bits of radio signal from all of these people around you. Now you can imagine if you stood in a room and there was all these radio signals of all these different channels coming at you at once, you would get very overwhelmed. I mean, I think some governments use that as like torture, right? So it's a similar thing here, where you're actually taking in so much energetic, emotional information into your body, and you're actually feeling all these people's different feelings, and it's just overwhelming. And that's where the large crowd can become very, very overwhelming, and you won't know why, but that's why. The next thing is, sometimes you're going to feel the pain of the whole world. and want to completely shut down. This is a very common experience for empaths, especially unaware empaths, which most of us are for a good deal of the time. Unfortunately, they don't identify empaths in classrooms like they might for other special needs or like giftedness or any of those things. And so we go along and have no idea why we're just, constantly feeling this overwhelming things going on around us. And as we get older and we're more aware, maybe we're out in the world more than we would be as a child, then we're picking up more and more. And then we might be on social media and we might be on the news channels and those sorts of things and just conveying and connecting emotionally to so much more. Maybe we're going to out with friends to a movie and the movie ends up being really violent and we are taking all of that in, right? And all of that, again, like that radio signal thing, it all hits and suddenly you feel like you just need to pull the covers over your head and completely shut everything off for a while. Now, this used to happen to me probably about once a month, where I would literally come home. I can tell you, in the one job I used to work, I'd be dressed in a suit, all ready to go, have been out all day, and I would come home. It was so overstimulating and so exhausting. I would come home and actually I would get in bed fully dressed in my suit, and I would actually pull the covers over my head and just lay there for a while because I could not take one more tiny bit of stimulation or I was just going to jump out of my skin. The way I liken it to, and I think for a lot of empaths, it will feel this way, is that, your nerves feel like they've almost moved to the outside of your body and somebody has been picking them like a guitar string for a long time. And of course, when that happens, it's too much. So that's one of the reasons you will oftentimes get super overwhelmed and feel like you just need to shut everything out every so often. Does that sound like you? Definitely make a comment. I love hearing the comments from people. You will sometimes feel out of control of your emotional state. What do I mean by that? You will walk into a room and you're going to be perfectly fine and totally yourself. And then suddenly you'll feel angry. You'll feel off. You'll feel sadness. And it's not necessarily yours. I know empaths who have been misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. Someone tried to actually misdiagnose me once with bipolar disorder simply because I just was feeling a bunch of sadness over something I saw. I'm not going to traumatize anybody else over that and couldn't get past it. And I'm like the most even-keeled, optimistic person. Had nothing to do with that. It was that I was feeling this particular pain all the time and I couldn't shut it out. I didn't know how to. Now I do, but I didn't at that point. So let me just state, is bipolar real? Yes, it is. It is something people need a diagnosis for and some help with. However, the number of empaths that I have met that have been misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder because they are unfortunately walking into spaces and they are literally like tuning forks and they are picking up what's going on around them, even without physically seeing any sign of this. So if you walk into a room as an empath and there is somebody in the room who's really upset about something, even without ever seeing that person or seeing any physical signs that that person's upset, you're picking it up and your body starts to tune into it. Your nervous system aligns with it and tunes into it. It's information you can use that is really important. You can get yourself out of the situation or you can choose to help. That's another video that I'll link here. I talk about becoming an aware empath and like how to manage that when you pick these things up. But basically what's going on is you start off feeling like you're totally normal and then suddenly you become this tuning fork. And so your mood goes up and down. One way to tell whether it was your mood actually shifting or it was the environment and the people around you that were causing you to have your mood shift up and down is to literally remove yourself from that situation. So a lot of empaths, for instance, will have a really hard time at the grocery store. I have a very hard time at the grocery store if it's like rush hour time where everybody's getting off work and everybody's all tense and worked up. I walk into there and it's like you feel like you're just taking on all of this stuff and it's overwhelming. It's so freaking overwhelming. I literally will not go after right that after work period or right after school period. Oh, no. And that's even with everything I do for myself to keep myself centered and not picking up as much as I can. It's just still so much. And I used to wonder why I would suddenly feel like really, really upset or really tense at the store. And then I'd say to my husband, I just need to walk outside for 1 second. And I would go back outside, get some fresh air. And suddenly I was feeling back to my normal, level-headed, happy self. And that's when I was really starting to realize, this was a few years ago, and I really realized it. I was really starting to realize that I was being impacted by these other people's emotional states. So I just want you to check in with yourself. If you find yourself having that happen during the day where you're feeling a certain way, right? And then suddenly all of a sudden you're feeling something totally different very quickly after entering a new space or being with a new person, then do a check-in and see if it's actually your emotion that's changed or if it's actually what you're absorbing from that other person or people around you. Okay. Another experience, you will have been told that you are quote unquote too sensitive. I don't know an empath in the world that has not been told at some point, oh, you're just too sensitive. You feel too much, or you're dramatic. Oh my goodness. Sometimes the drama one. So that's one of those that, because you actually do feel all this stuff and maybe, you're like me. I was the kid that like, if I found an injured grasshopper on the sidewalk, I would be picking it up and trying to help it heal. And then if it died or I found a dead one on the sidewalk or even a worm, I still save worms I still save animals. I just saved a bunny this morning, actually. I still do this all the time. I would pick up if it was like a dead little grasshopper. I would actually bury the grasshopper and have a quick little funeral for it. And I know all my friends when I was like 6 years old thought I was crazy and too sensitive. And what are you doing? And that's really weird. And whatever. You've probably been called weird too as an empath, but you can't help it. This is who you genuinely are. So if you've been called too sensitive, very likely that's another little check. This one's fun. You will be bullied. Unfortunately, in my many, 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 many years of experience and my own life of working with empaths around the world, one common factor is empaths tend to be the kids that get bullied. There's a couple of reasons for that I can discern. One is oftentimes empathic kids do tend to be very aware. They will oftentimes stand up against injustices or things that they're seeing in their world that are not fair, not right. They will stand up to defend other people that are getting picked on. I can tell you in my grade school, and I always hoped I did this, but I didn't fully know 100% that I did this till I got a few years ago, a friend from back then actually wrote me and said, hey, I just want to thank you. You were always the one who stood up for me. She was more quiet than I was. She was more of a target in some ways, I guess, than I was. And she would get bullied a lot when we were kids. And I would actually end up stepping in between. And then, of course, the bullies then turned on me because I made myself the target. But that is very true of empaths in general. I cannot tell you how many empaths I have worked with and spoken with and whatever that have not either they were originally getting bullied because of being too kind, too sensitive. It's the really insecure people that have zero empathic ability that tend to want to gain power in the world by pushing other people down. Those of us who just really want for the best for everyone in the room end up being the ones that get targeted. And so I have talked to a lot of empaths, and one common factor is they were either bullied just for being like too sensitive, too kind, too smart, too gentle, or they were bullied because they stood up against things they saw that were wrong. They stood up on behalf of other people that were getting bullied and therefore became the target. Pretty common for empaths in general. I typed all these up so I wouldn't forget any of these. So, number 6. Okay, so number 6, you will attract a narcissist or you will have been raised by one or both. I see this all the time. Sometimes it's both. And so a lot of times, so what I've seen is empaths that have been raised in sort of narcissistic or toxic family environments, oftentimes they will be the one that ended up getting a lot of the narcissistic gaslighting and abuse on them. The reason, as far as I can discern from like researching and reading everything from, psychologists that I possibly can on the topic, because I do see it so frequently, is that essentially a narcissist doesn't have any of those qualities of genuinely caring for other people or empathy or compassion or being like a shining light, which oftentimes empaths are very attractive to other people because we do care and we do sort of shine our little soul light out into the world. And that really is aggravating to a narcissist because it reflects back to them that they don't have any of those qualities. And there's like a void in there, kind of. And so they will then basically try to hold that empath down because it makes them feel less threatened for who they truly are. Now, we have world leaders right now that you can definitely see do this. Okay. They're very insecure and they're constantly trying to go after the little people that somehow that makes them feel better. Like, I don't know, you're already a world leader. Maybe you should chill. So you will see this, unfortunately, a lot. That we have this happen quite a bit. So if you were an empath that was raised by a narcissistic person, this is a very common thing. What then ends up happening is that you will then unknowingly go to look, out in the world for relationships. And because you're unconsciously programmed to seek what you know, and again, it's very unconscious, this isn't your fault, you will oftentimes end up choosing someone that is a narcissist because what you know and what's comfortable to you is actually trying to make that person feel better, seeing their potential, trying to lift them up in the world, all of those things. Now, for a narcissistic person, this is phenomenal because you're giving them love and adulation and all these things that they and care that they didn't get or don't feel inside themselves. Okay. So that's a very common one. So if you have been raised by a narcissist or you have attracted narcissistic relationships, very common for empaths, unfortunately. There are ways to break that. We'll talk about that in a second. And the final one, number 7 I put in was you're going to have major difficulty saying no. So if you find yourself, and this one's a big one, you guys, because I have had so many people in my life tell me like, boundaries, you need better boundaries. It's like, yeah, that's great. As an empath, we weren't taught, you literally weren't taught most of the time that you even had a right to have boundaries. You were existing oftentimes in the world to serve other people. And if you didn't serve those other people, there were things that happened, right? And so oftentimes, because we haven't even been taught that we can hold our own energetic boundaries, or what even boundaries are, like, what does that mean, right? Then it's really not helpful when people just tell you need boundaries. Okay. So a boundary is a way of saying no. And I find that empaths in general have a very hard time either holding boundaries or simply saying no when people are in need. Why is this? So the reason is because we authentically do care, number one. And secondly, we can actually feel other people's pain and suffering and need. And so therefore, we obviously want to help end that because it's not totally altruistic. One, we want to help that person, but 2, we want to be able to stop helping her or feeling their pain and suffering, right? And so because of that, it can be very, very hard for an empath to be able to say no. Now, if you add to that, having been brought up, let's say, in an environment or with a friend group that constantly you're the one that helps everybody, you're the helper, you're the good, you're the nice one, you're the kind one, you're the one who saves everybody, right? That becomes very much part of your identity. And so part of that identity may be that you're just always there for everyone else, which may mean that you put everything down that is for you. And therefore you end up never saying no to people. Now, these are like 7 examples. If you've got some more examples of things you think are very common for empaths, please put them in the comments. So let me ask you, like, what do you do about it? I'm sure you're thinking like, great, these are the experiences. They're not all fun. Most of them aren't fun. What do you do about it? Well, here's the thing. So at the end of the day, the fact that you are having these experiences, number one, and still standing here or still sitting here watching this video means you're pretty darn strong. I always tell empaths that we get told a lot that we are too sensitive or we're weak or whatever, but we're actually the ones who are running into fires. We're the ones running in when somebody's screaming fire and we're going to save people. Okay. And I mean that metaphorically, although certainly that can also be in real life. And so because of that, what I want you to think about is that actually means that you're incredibly strong, right? If you weren't so strong, you wouldn't have that instinct. You wouldn't actually move towards difficulty or danger or pain or any of those things and want so much to help. You would be like the non-empaths and just run the other way. It's easier to run the other way, isn't it? At some level, it's much harder to go into this all the time. It's much harder to wake up every day and feel the pain and suffering of the world and still go out there and try to help every day to the best of our ability. And that's what empaths do. So I created a small program, 5 days, that I'm calling the Empathic Badass Challenge. And basically every day for 5 days, you get one life-changing practice that if you just put that in place, and it's like easy peasy, guys. We're talking, a 30-minute, I think-ish video or an hour video to learn from, and then in literally, here's how you do this thing. And you put these 5 practices in place, starting with morning practices and going all the way to evening practices, developing your awareness around being an empath and how you can actually manage your own energy. And so I put that 5-day challenge together, and I call it the empathic badass, because the truth is we aren't weak. We're actually badasses. And when you learn how to actually control your empath nature, you can actually use it as a gift and not a curse. And so often I certainly felt cursed for a really long time. I can promise you, I can remember laying in bed and just praying, like, why would you make me this way? And then not, so I feel all this pain and suffering, and then I don't know what to do with it. Like, that is just ridiculous, right? So that's really how I started to develop these out. And now, again, from working with empaths literally around the world, these are my 5 best practices that I use on a daily basis, and that will genuinely shift you from being overwhelmed and thinking that being an empath kind of sucks and is completely wearing, to feeling empowered and knowing that you can actually use your empath nature as a gift. So if you're interested, you can check it out. It'll be in the comments below. I made it a not expensive program so that anybody could access this program, be able to use these tools, and be able to really shift in really critical ways. So if you have any thoughts, or if you have a topic you'd like me to take on about being an empath, about mind-body healing, about manifestation, about being a healer or a coach or a therapist, please go ahead and put those in the comments. I love doing videos in response to people's comments. Thanks for being here. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe. Definitely share this if you've got a friend of yours that's an empath and could use to hear this information as well. See you next time.